Today, we're going to start learning about how to use oil pastels, a fun, bright, expressive art material that gives us lots of different choices and freedom to express ourselves. We're going to need a blending stump, a wooden stylus, a piece of sandpaper, an exercise worksheet, a piece of paper towel, an oil pastel kit, and at least one chalk pastel as well. For best results with an oil pastel, use several fingers, hold the pastel in your hands close to the tip that you're going to color with, as well as coloring with a wide surface area. Find the biggest face or facet of the top that you can use and hold it so that that area is flat on the paper. This gives us the ability to color in a controlled, careful way. To start this exercise, we're going to make a light pressure covering. That means we're going to cover the whole box in a small, light amount of pressure. We're not pressing hard, we're just trying to cover everything in a little bit of color. Once we've colored in the whole box with our light pressure, we're also going to use the blending stump. And if your blending stump is dirty, you're going to have to clean it first. If you hold the blending stump at an angle so that the dirty part of the tip is pressed as much as possible against your sandpaper, and use a pulling motion with your arm as well as twisting with your fingers, you'll be able to clean the head of your blending stump really quickly and effectively, letting you blend this light pressure box very effectively. Once you've blended your light pressure box, you're going to use a heavy pressure on the next box, and we're going to try to see the difference between those two. If you are using a heavy pressure, you're going to have to press pretty hard. Your goal is to cover the entire box in as much pastel as you possibly can. We're trying to get a thick, heavy layer. Your goal is to have none of the text showing through the pastel. That's pretty hard to do, and you may not be able to. That's okay. If the pastel breaks, well, that's part of life sometimes, but try to hold them in such a way that you're supporting the whole pastel, and if you are pressing too hard, they will break. So that may be what happened to me in this instance. For our next box, we're going to use the light pressure technique with two different colors, and we're going to blend those colors together afterward to try to make a new color that cannot come from the box. As we're trying to mix a new color that doesn't come from the box, we're going to start with a light pressure layer of one color, and we're going to be consistent in our mark making. So we're currently mostly coloring diagonally from the lower left to the upper right. For the second light pressure layer with a whole second other color, we're going to switch that direction up, and we're going to color from low on the right and heading upward toward the left, so diagonally going the opposite direction. By doing that, we're going to obliterate a bunch of the lines that we would have normally and make blending this color much easier. Then we're going to take our blending stump, clean it off if we need. Once we've got it cleaned, we're going to blend all those colors together in a consistent, even way. For our next box, we're going to continue to use the light pressure technique, and we're going to control the marks that we make, as well as adding another spin onto this. Notice that I am coloring with a diagonal line that goes from lower on the left-hand side and higher on the right-hand side. Now this is important to keep track of so that if I'm layering multiple colors together, I can blend those colors with just my mark making. Also, notice that when I have a dirty pastel, I'm just going to take it and wipe it off with my paper towel. Okay, make sure it's clean. That way I don't have contamination. Because for this box, I'm trying to make a sand color and texture. First with my light pressure coloring, then I'll use another color of a yellow or tan of some sort. I will make opposite type of marks. For this sand texture, I'm going to mix another color of yellow, more of a yellow ochre, and I'm going to switch the direction of my mark making. This time, starting lower on the right-hand side and moving up as I head toward the left-hand side of my paper. This will help to blend the two colors together to give a nice base color for my sand. Then I'm going to stipple. Stippling is dotting or pressing a pastel with a fine point, the smallest area that you can at any particular time. Sometimes you might give it a little bit of a twist when the color is touching the page, and your goal is to put a variety of little tiny marks, little dots that add a little bit of color and a different interesting texture to your artwork. For our next box, we're going to clean a couple more of our pastels, and we're going to be scumbling. Scumbling is a specific type of mark making that uses circular lines that leave some space between them. And then we're going to layer multiple colors together. I'm going to use yellows, orange, and red. And as we mix those together and we color on top of one another, some places the color will mix, and other places each color will stand out and show up individually. This is a useful technique for maybe drawing a picture of Jupiter, or with different colors, creating a picture with bushes or stones or the texture of leaves on a tree. Lots of different things can be made with scumbling that adds a nice depth and activity to your artwork. As I start to blend it in using my blending stump, you'll notice that I continue using the same circular pattern of mark making that will reinforce the good work I did with my color. For this next box, we're going to make a directional linear pattern like you might see in grass or fur. And I'm going to start by drawing an eye of a kitty, and then I'm going to draw the fur in above it. So I'm going to start using a fine edge or point or corner of my pastel, and I'm going to use short controlled marks that follow a same direction or a internal logic. Around a cat's eye, the fur is all heading away from the eye, growing out away from the eye, and so I'm using a bunch of different strokes over and over with a few different colors that are all going to follow that same direction, starting close to the eye and picking up just a little bit as I get done with each mark, making a finer point than the start of the color, which reinforces the feeling or texture of fur. Notice that when I'm making my marks, I'm not zigzagging back and forth. I'm using individual strokes that each start in the same approximate place, moving slightly each time, and that head away from the eye. I'm never coloring back toward the eye. So I'm keeping that direction going. And just like with scumbling, if I'm going to use a blending stump in this step, I'm going to continue to blend in the same direction as the marks that I've made. For our next box, we're going to practice blending two colors together by coloring very heavily on opposite corners with two different colors, and then lightening up our coloring as we approach the middle of the box. Then we're going to use a blending stump and experiment with different types of motion or different marks that we can use to blend those colors. Try scumbling or circular motions, linear, pulling from one side, pulling to the other. Experiment and see what works and what doesn't. For our next box, we're going to try Sgrafito, a technique named after the Italian word sgrafito, meaning scratching or scratching on the surface. With this, we're going to use 2 layers of color. Apologies for the video being slightly out of focus in this point, but we're going to put a layer of a medium pressure color, a little bit heavier than the light pressure, a little bit lighter than the heavy pressure that we were using before. We're going to put one color down with that, then color directly on top of it with a second color. Once we have both layers in a good medium pressure completely filled on, then we're going to take our wooden stylus tool, and that's where the scratching comes in. We're going to scratch away the top layer, and as you'll notice, you'll see some of the undercoat, the lower layer of color, will show through where you scratch it. This is a great way to reinforce a bunch of different textures or to make lots of different interesting effects. For the next 2 boxes, we're going to experiment mixing media. The first time, we're going to use a light pressure with our oil pastel, and then with a different color of a chalk pastel, we're going to color on top of it and blend the 2 together. Sometimes we can get different effects by blending the chalk and the chalky colory dust into the oil pastel instead of Sometimes we also might want to mix oil pastel directly on top of the dusty chalk pastel, and that's great too. We're going to experiment with that and see what happens. So for this time, we're going to put a light amount of chalk pastel on our box, maybe a medium amount. We don't want it super duper heavy and dripping dust, but we want to cover everything pretty well. We're going to color pretty firmly with our chalk pastel and then blend it with a clean blending stump. Remember, if you haven't cleaned your blending stump in a while, just run it against the sandpaper with a pulling and twisting motion, and you'll have it clean and ready to use in no time. For our final box, I'm going to ask that you use at least 2 of the techniques that we've talked about and experimented with here to draw a leaf and include multiple colors of the leaf, as well as a vein through the center of the leaf and a stem coming off of the leaf. Good luck!